Fresno State University in political science. I also am an author and a writer, and I'd like to welcome you to this town hall. I'm going to be very brief here. We will begin after I finish with a 10-minute clip from the speech Elizabeth Warren gave on the Senate floor, summarizing the letter that was delivered by 600 retired prosecutors. And bear in mind, these are not just Democrats, but a lot of them are Republicans. We have her read this letter because it is kind of a bipartisan indictment of Trump's behavior. I want to emphasize that having Mrs. Warren on TV, we're not endorsing her as a candidate. I know there are probably people who favor other candidates. We have a strong slate of Democrats to run against Trump, so I just want to make that clear. After Warren is done, Pat will speak for 10 minutes, and if she goes over time, I will do this gesture. And then we want to devote the rest of the evening up until the very end to a kind of give and take, discussion, debate, and try to arrive at some kind of consensus. I've listed some talking points in the opposite side of this program. You can talk about anything that's on your mind. These are just some suggested areas we could go into. So without further ado, we will listen to Elizabeth Warren. We will end the night on a humorous note. I'm playing a minute 40 song by the German duo Jesko and Dennis. It is subtitled, and they did a very clever song about Trump based on the rock classic Jump. And we need to laugh and try to keep our sense of humor in these very dark times. All right. Where's the sound? There we go.
Over 600 federal prosecutors the conduct of President Trump described in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report would, in the case of any other person not covered by the Office of Legal Counsel policy against indicting a sitting president, would result in multiple felony charges for obstruction of justice. So I'm going to read their letter because I think it is important, and I want to make sure it's in the record here. Here's the letter from more than 600 former prosecutors. Quote, "We are former federal prosecutors. We served under both Republican and Democratic administrations at different levels of the federal system, as line attorneys, supervisors, special prosecutors, United States attorneys, and senior officials at the Department of Justice. The offices in which we served were small, medium, and large, urban and suburban and rural, and located in all parts of the country. Each of us believes that the conduct of President Trump described in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report would, in the case of any other person not covered by the Office of Legal Counsel policy against indicting a sitting president, result in multiple felony charges for obstruction of justice." I just want to read that part again. Would result in multiple felony charges for obstruction of justice. The Mueller report describes several acts that satisfy all of the elements for an obstruction of justice charge. Conduct that obstructed or intended to obstruct the truth-finding process, as to which the evidence of corrupt intent and connection to pending proceedings is overwhelming. These include the president's efforts to fire Mueller and to falsify evidence about that effort, the president's effort to limit the scope of Mueller's investigation to exclude his conduct, and the president's efforts to prevent witnesses from cooperating with investigators probing him and his campaign. Under the heading in the letter, attempts to fire Mueller and then create false evidence. Continuing with the letter, Despite being advised by then White House counsel Don McGahn that he could face legal jeopardy for doing so, Trump directed McGahn on multiple occasions to fire Mueller or to gin up false conflicts of interest as a pretext for getting rid of the special counsel. When these acts began to come into public view, Trump made, quote, repeated efforts to have McGahn deny the story, close quote, going so far as to tell McGahn to write a letter, quote, for our files, close quote, falsely denying that Trump had directed Mueller's termination. Firing Mueller would have seriously impeded the investigation of the president and his associates. Obstruction in its most literal sense. Directing the creation of false government records in order to prevent or discredit truthful testimony is similarly unlawful. The special counsel's report states, quote, substantial evidence indicates that in repeatedly urging McGahn to dispute that he was ordered to have the special counsel terminated, the president acted for the purpose of influencing McGahn's account in order to deflect or prevent scrutiny of the president's conduct toward the investigation, close quote. Also, within the letter, under the header, attempts to limit the Mueller investigation. The report describes multiple efforts by the president to curtail the scope of the special counsel's investigation. First, the president repeatedly pressured then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to reverse his legally mandated decision to recuse himself from the investigation. The president's stated reason was that he wanted an attorney general who would, quote, protect, close quote, him, including from the special counsel investigation. He also directed then White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus to fire Sessions, and Priebus refused. Second, after McGahn told the president that he could not contact Sessions himself to discuss the investigation, Trump went outside the White House, instructing his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to carry a demand to Sessions to direct Mueller to confine his investigation to future elections. Lewandowski tried and failed to contact Sessions in private. After a second meeting with Trump, Lewandowski passed Trump's message to senior White House official Rick Dearborn, who Lewandowski thought would be a better messenger because of his prior relationship with Sessions. Dearborn did not pass along Trump's message. As the report explains, quote, substantial evidence indicates that the president's effort to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president's and the campaign's conduct, close quote. In other words, the president employed a private citizen to try to get the Attorney General to limit the scope of an ongoing investigation into the president and his associates. All of his conduct, trying to control and impede the investigation against the president by leveraging his authority over others, is similar to conduct we have seen charged against other public officials and people in powerful positions. Now, the next section of the report from the 600, quote, the special counsel's report establishes that the president tried to influence the decisions of both Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort with regard to cooperating with investigators. Some of this tampering and intimidation, including the dangling of pardons, was done in plain sight via tweets and public statements. Other such behavior was done via private messages through private attorneys, such as Trump counsel Rudy Giuliani's message to Cohen's lawyer that Cohen should, quote, sleep well tonight, you have friends in high places, close quote. Of course, these aren't the only acts of potential obstruction detailed by the special counsel. It would be well within the purview of normal prosecutorial judgment also to charge other acts detailed in the report. We emphasize these are not matters of close professional judgment. Of course, there are potential defenses or arguments that could be raised in response to an indictment of the nature we describe here. In our system, every accused person is presumed innocent and is always the government's burden to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. But to look at these facts and say that a prosecutor could not probably sustain a conviction for obstruction of justice, the standards set out in principles of federal prosecution, runs counter to logic and our experience. As former federal prosecutors, we recognize that prosecuting obstruction of justice cases is critical because unchecked obstruction, which allows intentional interference with criminal investigations to go unpunished, puts our whole system of justice at risk. We believe strongly that, but for the OLC memo, the overwhelming weight of professional judgment would come down in favor of prosecution for the conduct outlined in the Mueller report. Close quote. That's over 600 former federal prosecutors saying that if we were talking about any person in this country other than the President of the United States, that person would be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. Because of that OLC opinion that a sitting president cannot be indicted, the only mechanism to hold the president accountable and to ensure that the president is not above the law is for Congress to initiate impeachment proceedings.
Yeah, that's about where that ends. Where's the mic?
So,
Yeah, there's going to be a quiz about this in about the end of the meeting, so I hope you all took good notes. I'll hand the floor over to my very capable colleague, Pat, who is
Thank you,
much better
Dr.
legal mind than I have.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. And truth in advertising, I time myself under 15 minutes, okay? So I'm going to talk, I went to law school in New York City, so I'm going to talk very quickly. My name is Pat Brown. I clerk for a federal judge in the Eastern District of California, attended the Watergate hearings, met Judge Bork, and have read the Mueller report cover to cover. Plus, I listened to read it aloud a second time. People read it aloud. I read it aloud. I was on a conference call with House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler on May 28, 2019, and listened to all 4 hours of the House hearing this Monday on obstruction. This is my take on how to read the Mueller report and how many of you have read all or part of the Mueller report. Okay, a little bit here, but only 3% of the population have actually read it, so you're in good stead. 22% Americans are okay with impeachment, 76% of Democrats want impeachment, 20 of 24 Dems on the Judiciary Committee want impeachment, 62 Dems in the House and 1 Republican want impeachment, and it's 255 days to the primary. Issued on April 18, 2019, the Mueller said 3 things in the report. Number 1, Russia interfered. Number 2, Trump obstructed. And number 3, he couldn't charge because of that Department of Justice rule that she mentioned, which is not a law, it's just a rule. Mueller waited 28 days to object to Barr's summary misconstruing his report. And the purpose of the report was to preserve evidence of crimes while the witnesses' memories were fresh and before documents were destroyed, which they were. At a press conference on May 29, 2019, Mueller said, quote, "We chose these words carefully," unquote. Every word in the report was carefully chosen by a meticulous attorney, except the double negative. Quote, "While this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him," unquote. That's why Mueller must testify. Not indicting Trump has everything to do with a Republican restriction and nothing to do with Trump's behavior. Clear, indictable offenses and clear collusion, even with the redacted sections and before Congress has even seen any underlying documents or counterintelligence, are laid out in the report. It's 448 pages, and there are 3 ways to read it: as a legal document, as a political document, and as a counterintelligence document. And guess what? It's shorter than Harry Potter, so everybody can read it. There are 140 Russian contacts by the Trump campaign in the Mueller report. Indictments: 8 Americans, 25 Russians, 3 Russian companions, and you can see the full list in the March 24th issue of Time magazine. Pleas of guilty and cooperators: Flynn and Gates lying to investigators. Convictions: Manafort 7.5 years for financial crimes, Michael Cohen for tax fraud, campaign finance violations and lying, and Papadopoulos 14 days for lying, plus 8 more minions, Trump minions. No one is above the law, not even the president, and hardly a witch hunt. How to read it. Volume 1 is evidence, quote, of sweeping, multiple, systematic efforts of Russian hacking into our 2016 election. Volume 2 lays out 12 obstruction of justice violations, 4 of which meet all 3 elements of felonies. It has to be an obstructive act, it has to be a nexus to an investigation, either current or future, and has to have corrupt intent. And we saw in the Warren video that now 100 federal prosecutors on both sides of the aisle feel like he should have been indicted. And if they had a letter for federal law clerks, I would sign it. The Republicans are arguing that, like Nixon said to David Frost, quote, "If the president does it, it isn't a crime." That's not true then, and that's not true now. For instance, you can legally throw your own laptop into the river, but you can't do it to avoid the FBI looking on it. That's obstructive intent. Remember Governor Rod of Illinois, who appointed a replacement senator when there was a vacancy? That was his legal right, but the corrupt intent was that he did it for a bribe. For that, he went to prison. Regarding Watergate versus this Russian gate, it's worse than Watergate. Monday was the first U.S. House hearing into obstruction with White House counsel John Dean of the Nixon Watergate hearing, who actually, he didn't go to jail. He went into a witness protection program for 18 months after he blew the whistle on Nixon's connection to the June 1972 Watergate D.C. break-in at the DNC and the existence of tapes with Nixon's cover-up. Dean this week testified in Congress because he was fearful for the country after Trump was elected in November 2016. The U.S. House Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, and he knew Trump as when he was a New York Assemblyman in the Upper West Side of New York, said, and I quote, "The GOP said today that this committee should not be investigating a bogus investigation, but the origins of a bogus investigation. I want to be clear that the Mueller report shows that Russians interfered in our election to get Trump elected, that the Trump campaign knew about the attack on from Russia, that it welcomed that interference, and that there was clear evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, but does not constitute conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not bogus, but a real threat to our country, unquote. As I said before, I was on a May 28th, 2019 conference call with Chairman Jerry Nadler, and here were his points. First of all, that Mueller left it to Congress to finish the work he couldn't do. Secondly, subpoenas are not optionals. They must be complied with, whether for testimony or documents. Third, executive privilege can only be asserted by the president and only on a limited certain items. Fourth, there is no such thing as immunity, no such thing as blanket privilege. In other words, Trump's staff, all his cronies, must show up to testify before Congress. Nadler also said that Trump boasts, quote, "I am obstructing Congress" by stonewalling, unquote. And that was exactly in the Nixon impeachment, Article 3, for obstructing Congress. Nadler said that the House will cite for contempt Attorney General Barr and White House counsel McGahn or anyone else. The House counsel will go to court to get an order, and this is serious. In the last 3 weeks, the courts have supported Congress, and when the Republicans claimed that Congress must have a legitimate purpose to issue these subpoenas, and Nadler said there's no such thing as absolute immunity to say, I won't show up to testify to Congress. Now, regarding Volume 2, Nadler also said that Michael Cohen went to jail for campaign cover-up at the direction of the president. In other words, Trump participated in a felony. Secondly, he said, abuse of power is not obstruction. So under Article 3, which is for the judiciary, treason can only be brought if it's the Congress has declared war. And since Congress has not declared war, the Congress can't do treason right now. But it can talk about the subversion of the law, and that Nadler called gross abuse. I also want to, my own aside is that Madison in the Federalist Papers put in treason because the founders really believed that America would only last 3 or 4 years before England and other foreign countries would come back to try to take us over. So that's why they put in there treason and aiding and abetting foreign powers. Nadler also said things Congress must legislate into law, coming off the report, among other things, are tolling the statute of limitation so that when Trump leaves, he can be indicted. And also, lastly, he said there is no such thing as unrecusing. Trump tried to get Sessions to do that, okay? Sessions had already gone to the Office of Legal Counsel in the DOJ, and they already came back and said, you have to recuse yourself. The Mueller report rejected the suggestion that investigations impede the Article 2 powers of the presidency, as the Republicans claim. John Dean testified that every president before Trump, including Bill Clinton, compartmentalizes and gets things done even if being investigated. And you can see that on page 178 where Mueller discusses this. Also, you don't need an underlying crime. The best obstructors would get off scot-free, and that's according to 18 United States Code 1001. So the Mueller report says that there's the same corrupt obstruction as Watergate. In fact, John Dean, quote, said, Trump is fast competition to Nixon, unquote. And Dean testified as White House counsel for Nixon, the same position in the White House as Dan McCann, who rejected subpoenas even though he is now a private citizen, and the statute states that any White House counsel's client is not an individual like Trump. McGahn doesn't represent Trump, but the American people. Dean showed up to testify when McGahn should have, and he didn't. When I was in law school, my professors told us that if you ever got a subpoena from Congress, you better show up even if you take the fifth. I went to the Watergate hearings in 1974 and heard L. Patrick Gray, the FBI director. I heard Robert Bork speak at my law school after he was rejected for the Supreme Court for his role in the Saturday Night Massacre, and I can explain that if you're interested. But Nixon's case almost exactly is the same case as the case against Trump. First of all, about firing the prosecutor. In the report, it shows that Trump tried twice, first with McGahn and then Lewandowski, to get Mueller, Comey and Mueller fired. Pardons. Paragraph 9, Article 3 of the impeachment of Nixon was, as I said before, the same here, the dangling pardons of Trump. Both presidents called the CIA to try to stop the investigation. Mike Pompeo, called to put pressure on the FBI to stop the investigation when he was in the CIA. And both presidents were named, quote, co-conspirators. Trump in the Cohen, remember when Michael made payments with Trump's signature on a check for $130,000 in the Southern District of New York to Stormy Daniels. So he was named a co-conspirator, Trump was. When Watergate hearings started, only 19% of the American public wanted to impeach, but that rose to 57% because of the hearings. It's important to note that no president, Republican or Democrat, has ever been impeached or removed from office after a trial by the Senate. To impeach means simply to be indicted by the House and sent to a trial to Senate, which can only remove the president by 2/3. Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School says, however, that the impeachment vote can take place in the House. In Volume 2, look for witness tamperings, that is obstruction. On May 20th, 2019, a letter excluded Hope Hicks and McGahn from testifying, and they've stonewalled documents and testimony that now freak out Trump. Hicks is coming to testify behind closed doors next week, and she had no choice. She was there in the campaign before he was sworn as a president, and Trump adores her and calls her Hopi. She left the White House 2 days before she admitted telling, quote, little white lies to Congress for her boss, Trump. Also, dangling pardons. Obstruction on page 173. The promise of a pardon is not protected by the Constitution, although it does give broad pardoning power to the United States. And again, that was Nixon, paragraph 9 of Article 1 of impeachment, was Nixon dangling pardons. But I discovered in my reading of the Constitution this week that something that no one's mentioned, and that is in Article 2, Section 2, allows for pardons except in cases of impeachment. So in my opinion, I believe the only reason that Attorney General Barr gave in to give Congress the ability to go to the Department of Justice to review some underlying documents to the report is because he was scheduled to be held in contempt in the House 2 days ago. And if he was held in contempt, he could have been impeached as Attorney General, and thus he could not be eligible for a pardon, let alone he could be possibly disbarred. So that's what I think that Barr is trying to make sure that he is not impeached because he couldn't get a pardon. Page 121, defense counsel called Flynn after the defense agreement between Flynn and the White House. And really the question really is, what's missing from the Mueller report is what did Trump know? In my Washington Post version of the report, it has Trump's written answers to those questions submitted by Mueller. And mostly, he doesn't remember anything, which either means that he's lying or that he's old and incompetent anyway. So he takes the time to repeat. So he takes the time in his written answers to repeat that he won and that Hillary, and to trash Hillary. Okay, and he makes it appear that he only learned about any Russian interference was through the media. There is systematic destruction of evidence, which is obstruction, emails missing, no such thing as recusing Sessions, as I said before, that's obstruction. Done in plain sight, can it be? Yes, that's obstruction. And national security threat were Manafort and the Russian agents, okay? Russian agents. Trump waited 18 days to fire Flynn after Sally Yates, the acting AG, went to the White House twice to warn about Flynn and his compromise with Russia hacking into our 2016 election. So the question really remains, the bottom line, why is everyone around the president deceptive? There is other behavior that Dr. Dan will talk about beyond the Mueller report, unbefitting of the president. We call this lawful but awful, okay? For instance, babies in cages. Under his watch, 6 children have died since December and 46 total migrants. A Molliet clause, which is Dr. Garst teaches a course at Fresno State and can expand on. The Trump Tower, Moscow Tower, money laundering, charity, passing nuclear materials to Saudi Arabia after our American reporter was murdered, and back channels between the Trump campaign and Russia. Kellyanne Conway has violated the Hatch Act in plain view, and Trump has tacitly obeyed it. And I haven't even got to Jared Kushner, which would take me 3 days to wax about him. But finally, Nancy Pelosi was at the American Law School graduation last week, working a plan, wants to see him in prison, not just impeach. Number one, evidence is in volume 2 for laying the evidentiary evidence for trials, impeachment trials. And number 2, and this is my opinion, I think she's playing to her members in swing states, not just so that they can get reelected in 2020, because she needs them in order to be reelected as Speaker. Today she reiterated that the committee chairs are doing their work, and there are pieces in the Mueller report, I don't have time to go through it, that support her position. Finally, Trump's statement yesterday to George Stephanopoulos is admissible in a court as hearsay exceptions. First of all, and it's his MO, a pattern of crime, like a crime boss, admission against interest. Trump said in his written responses to Mueller that when he said, quote, "Russia, are you listening," unquote, he was, quote, unquote, joking and, quote, unquote, just being sarcastic. We saw for ourselves that was not the case yesterday. That is why you want witnesses and defendants to testify, to weigh for yourself their demeanor and their credibility. What can we do? What must we do? Former GOP Republican Congressman Jolly from Florida said it best yesterday. Pelosi must do a primetime speech, sense of urgency, take back the Senate, and we must move to impeachment. Dr. Garst?
Well, that's a really hard act to follow, and we now are absolved from having to read the Mueller report because Pat has laid it out all so concisely and beautifully for us. She mentioned the emoluments clause. She noted in my American government class, I stress that when I talk about the Constitution. The president has been in violation of that part of the Constitution from day one. And that alone is grounds for impeachment. He swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and he's been using the White House as a branding opportunity and a way of getting richer. And the latest example of that was going to Ireland, and we're spending as taxpayers millions of dollars on those golf trips. So I don't want to talk any longer. I want to hear what people have to say, because I think everyone's chomping at the bits to get their opinion in. So I will take this gentleman's hand first.
It's on? Okay.
I'll hold it back here so we don't deafen anybody.
Yeah, I guess I was.
You made a comment about DOJ policy not being able to indict a sitting president. Policy, you said, and I agree, is not law. So why can't they power through that and indict the SOB anyway?
Because, let's see here, I got to turn it back on. Well, because Trump put his minion Barr in the DOJ place, okay? And he's obstructing, Barr is obstructing, that's why I think there's ground to impeach him, okay? And it's not a law, which means it should go and be litigated in the courts, in the federal courts. And who should do that but the Department of Justice? Just like the Department of Justice ought to go to the courts and say, hey, the Congress has a right to the underlying documents, that's the law, and so Judge, let's get those underlying documents in the counterintelligence. But Barr won't do it. He's obstructing justice too, and Trump put him in there, okay? And so that's really what I think that Nadler and Nancy are trying to do, which is the courts will defer if they have shown that they have tried to do accommodations to the witnesses and accommodations to work with the DOJ. That's the only reason you can, except for what I mentioned, the only reason why they would let Barr off the hook. But they haven't let him off the hook yet. He still could be held in contempt if, depending on what they show. The other weird thing is, besides all this, you know, hopes and Don Jr. should be publicly being, you know, testifying. But that really, I'm with Dr. Dan. I want to hear what you would like to say.
You want to have another comment?
Okay, we have a bunch of hands here. And I think Barr is not Trump's minion, he's Trump's Roy Cohn.
I've been talking to lots of friends and asking questions. So, you know, 'cause obviously the Senate is not going to find him guilty. We all know that. So, you know, the question is, should Congress fulfill their constitutional duty no matter what the outcome is? But we've also been talking about Nancy's strategy. And I don't know about everybody else in the room, but I've always found Pence a little scarier just because I think it would be easier for him to get reelected. And so is Nancy kind of stalling a little bit till we get closer to the election to make sure Trump doesn't just resign and leave Pence in charge and get him reelected, where if she holds off a little bit longer? So what does everybody think about that?
Yeah, does someone have a response to that question or their viewpoint on Pence being this strategy, fear of Pence?
Yeah.
Back there.
My name's Chris. So I understand the fear about Pence being scarier because he is definitely more competent and more experienced and knows how to play the political game in ways that Trump does not. On the other hand, I don't think there would be as much enthusiasm about Pence from Trump's followers. And I think that I don't see people turning out for Pence the way that a lot of people turned out for Trump. So I don't know, I kind of feel like you gotta fight the monster that's there first and then maybe worry about Pence later. But I get the idea that he's scary.
Yeah, and please again say your name. Sure.
My name is Tucker, and I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. I agree with the idea that, I mean, there could be bodies buried in the White House lawn and the Senate would not remove him from office. But you mentioned the Lawrence Tribe option, by which the House could impeach Trump without the Senate. I'm not familiar with that. Could someone please explain that more thoroughly?
You want to go ahead and do that?
You're the legal person.
Oh, okay, the legal person. So,
Thank you.
So, Lawrence Tribe is a constitutional attorney, professor at Harvard Law School. And so, he's kind of been the nemesis of the other grand man from Harvard Law School, Dershowitz, who has, for some reason, supported Trump. I have no idea why. But within the last 3 days, Tribe was on MSNBC, and he said that there's no reason why the House can't have its own trial. And now, originally, I don't know if I put it in my notes, but Nadler had said there's no difference in the witnesses or in the documents between having a impeachment inquiry and an impeachment hearing in the House. He thinks it's the same stuff, okay, that they're going after this week. But Tribe has said, have the hearing, declare for an impeachment in the House, have the trial there, have a vote by all of the House members, which is predominantly Democratic, and would vote to impeach. And that circumvents the Senate and doesn't rely upon the Senate and still sticks it to Trump, who hates any talk of the I word. So that is what, I trust Tribe. I think that's, he's got a good idea there, and I think he knows of what he speaks.
So that is constitutional?
According to Tribe, and it would be not binding in this. An impeachment is just an indictment, and that's why an indictment would normally go for the trial to the Senate. But as you said, Dee, there's no way in heck that they're going to vote as long as McConnell is there.
Yeah, the only difference.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The only difference is he would still be in office, but he'd have a scarlet eye going into the 2020 election. And I guess he is someone who's pretty conscious about his image, and that seems to really upset him. So, this gentleman here has his hand up. So, anyone on this side of the room, by the way, it's all been on this side. You guys are really quiet over here.
Right side.
Oh.
My name's Paul, and my question is, if the House of Representatives impeach Trump, could McConnell refuse to hold a trial in the Senate? Or is he compelled to do so whether he wants to or not?
He's not doing anything else.
Yeah, that's a good question, and he is pledged not to even bring it to the Senate for a trial. And McConnell, regardless of what you think about him, he's a despicable person. He's totally corrupt. And his wife is completely corrupt as well. And I know a thing or two, having lived in China, about her type. Lots of Guanxi and family business there. But he does know Senate procedure, so I presume he's on fairly solid terrain about that. My thinking is that, we impeach the president, have the Senate, take a stand on this, and then hold them to account if they allow this criminal to stay in the White House.
But what if, the Congress refuses to hold a hearing or a trial or anything?
Yeah. Someone else, do you want to say something, Pat, or? Okay.
I'm Kathy, and it really wasn't until the Mueller report came out that I became so strongly in favor of impeachment. It seems as though Pelosi is doing her best to make sure we have a strong Democratic showing in 2020. But I'm really of the opinion that we also have to have a strong showing right now and get him impeached. Doesn't matter how far it goes. If it's just through the House, at least, as you said, Dan, he has that red mark on him.
Anyone on this side of the room? Oh, great. Yeah. Let's see, you have your hand up first.
Your name?
John. Maybe last week or so, Nancy Pelosi made that comment that I don't want him impeached, I want him in prison. And I understood the context of what that was. And prior to that, I'm like, I want him impeached. And then she said that. And in the context I understood was that if they impeached him, but then did not because the Senate didn't impeach him, that then later, after he's out of the presidency, and they try to indict him, that then because the Senate, if you will, found him innocent or not guilty, then that would weigh against him being indicted and being able to go to prison. And so she threw that out there, and I don't know wanted to comment on that, if that's a possibility, that could happen. And so, you know, we impeach him in the House, and it goes to the Senate, and that doesn't happen, and he wins. And they said that's probably why he wants to be impeached, so that it goes through that whole process. He knows later, you're not gonna put me in jail, because too bad, Senate said. I wondered about that, and she made that comment, and I wonder what was behind that, if that was the case.
So, I'll try it. I'm a two-fisted, okay. I'm sorry about that. So somebody said it well today on TV, and I'm not sure who it was. It doesn't really matter what we do. Trump's going to do it anyway. He'll do whatever he'll say whatever he does to get elected, to cheat, to, you know, and so I agree with all your assessment about that. And that's kind of what Nadler was saying about building the case to defer to the federal courts. You have to not show just that you've accommodated the witnesses and the evidence, but also through those hearings. Like, for instance, the hearing today was in counterintelligence with Adam Schiff. And so they're just beginning that kind of inquiry, and they hopefully will build those cases after he leaves, if he leaves office. That's it. Even I heard this week somebody question that, even if he, you know, didn't get elected in 2020, he's going to claim that it was rigged, and that he's going to want to stick around like any other fascist dictator. So I don't know, but we're in unknown territory. So I got to hand it to both Nadler and to Nancy. They have behind the scenes attorneys and staff attorneys that are trying to work it, and you know, she held back again today from pushing impeachment, and you know, I already told you, I think she's also a really terrific vote counter, and so she knows what those votes are in the House. And remember, I also said in my introduction that it's a political document as well as a legal document.
Someone had their hand up over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get to the side.
Comment to the gentleman's Z. I actually did some research on that subject. I found that if the Senate doesn't convict, then the House has the final say, and then but then Trump was gonna he's gonna want to exonerate himself. So I think that he's going to force McConnell to hold a trial. So yeah.
What's the statute of limitations on obstruction?
I think if he gets reelected, he can wait out a number of the charges, including the one for campaign finance violation. I mean, I'll get to your question here in a minute, but my scenario, which I always stated from day one of his administration, is if he's not reelected in 2020 and he can't stay in the White House, he will try to flee the country. Yeah, that's what Tom Holyoke, my colleague at Fresno State, said. Well, yeah, give him away. You know, Russia wants him, take him. So I like sitting over there. Yeah, we'll pay for the plane ticket.
So, Paul again. So I'm worried that if I really do kind of trust Nancy Pelosi in that, you know, like as you said, she's the best vote counter in the history of our country, probably the speaker, that's what I've read. That she doesn't want to push impeachment because we don't have the votes to impeach. I think the worst scenario would be if we have an impeachment investigation and then we have a vote and we don't win the vote.
Yes.
I mean, Trump will use that as an exoneration.
More than that.
So-
More than that, the courts that are trying them in New York and so, because the Senate hasn't, as we've lost in the Senate, they have a way of saying that if a verdict's already been made in his innocence, then why should we try this case? And then he can get totally out of some of them at least.
Yeah, I can make one short comment. I mean, these are all things pertaining to the obstruction of justice and Mueller, brief. But there are other crimes. I mean, there's who knows, possible mail fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering. Yeah, the New York, district attorney, they're digging their claws into the Trump organization. They're not bound by the federal DOJ regulations, so this could get very interesting.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Tucker. I just wanted to raise a concern that I have had, and I'm still a little bit searching for the words for it. I keep hearing questions and thoughts about what can we do, and how would this work, and how would that work, and it seems to me that all of our scenarios and questions are dependent upon sort of a basic trust in our institutions and in our system of checks and balances. And I see a pretty scary emerging pattern of lawlessness in the upper levels of our government. People just brazenly defying subpoenas, and as has been mentioned, Trump arguing that Congress simply does not have oversight authority, which is, clearly just an unconstitutional position. But this lawlessness seems to have creeped across all three branches of government at the highest levels. Trump made a comment that the courts would never allow impeachment, which of course that's not how impeachment works. But clearly he's depending on his appointed judges to protect him in some ways. And so I'm not by nature an alarmist or a reactionist, but I'm spinning out, scary scenarios of what happens if Trump has already said that he should get to extend his term by 2 years to compensate him for this 2 years of this witch hunt. He's already joked about, joking but not joking about a lifetime presidency. And so, I'm really concerned and want to know what people with more legal knowledge than myself, what would happen if Trump lost the 2020 election and refused to concede, or something really dire like that.
So, and I feel like what Tucker is saying is why it's so necessary that we impeach, because Trump has just violated so many norms and lowered so many standards that I feel like at this point, if it were anybody else, they would have already been impeached. And I'm used to Democrats being held to different standards, but now even he's held to lower standards than any other politician. And so while I understand Nancy Pelosi's reluctance to impeach, I almost felt like she almost weakened her own position by saying, I don't want to see him impeached, I want to see him in prison. Well, if you think impeachment is a pipe dream, imprisonment is way more of a pipe dream, because who's going to charge him? Yes, there are a lot of norms that have been destroyed, but there's a norm that you don't charge even former presidents of a crime. Nixon was pardoned.
And Seth Meyers made the same point. If you want to see him in jail, then why not impeach him? These late night comedians are frequently our most astute political commentators right now. Colbert and Myers and Trevor Noah. So someone else had their hand up. I think you were first, and then we'll move on to the gentleman back there.
I do have a question. And my name is Andy. I've heard if they start the impeachment inquiry that Trump cannot pardon during that time. Is that true? If so, that might be a good reason to start the inquiry.
I unplugged that other mic. No, that one doesn't work.
Okay, I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I do want to say something about Nixon, and because somebody had mentioned the pardon, what happened with Gerald Ford. And I'm thinking that because of that constitutional clause that I read earlier about you can be pardoned except for impeachment, makes me think that, first of all, Nixon, who was an attorney, knew about that when Goldwater came to his office and said, we don't have the votes in the Senate for you, and you're going to probably have to resign. And Nixon, who had a sense of the law in some weird, twisted way that Trump doesn't, I think that maybe, I don't know this for a fact, I haven't read anything about it, there was had to be some deal between Nixon and Ford that if he resigned, he wouldn't be impeached and then he could get a pardon. So that may be here. There's also, as Tucker and other people have said, it's scarier than we even believe. Because going back to volume 1, there's a footnote about Russia's interference. And in that footnote, remember I said that Mueller picks his words carefully. Well, in that footnote, it says that Russia promoted Bernie and Trump, okay? Bernie was first in that paragraph, in that footnote. And also in volume 1, he talks about a Russian bot named Lisa Haynes, who essentially was a black woman, probably fake, who was used by Russia in the 2016 election for black voter suppression. So on top of all the obstruction that we have and all the felonies, we have no evidence that Russia is still not in our electoral system looking towards 2020 and being more sophisticated. And sometimes part of this trying to stir the pot with Russia in our elections, I think is still evident, because when I bring up to my friends who are strong Bernie supporters and tell them that 126 Russian bots were posted on the Bernie social media in the 2016, they always said, okay, but it didn't influence my vote, and okay, but Bernie didn't know anything about it, and okay, I don't care about the 2020 election, I'm more concerned about the DNC and the rules about independents and progressives in the 2020 election. So I bring that up not to disparage at all Bernie Sanders or its voters, but I bring it up to show that we have to take a stand. We have to move towards together on all fronts, besides impeachment, besides trying to take it to the courts by getting a Democrat or an independent elected in 2020. And we have to really stand together, because that's really what Russia has tried to do, did do in 2016. That's what the Mueller report says. They were there then, they are probably still here, and this time we won't even know it.
I'm going to follow up just for a minute, and then I'll answer the gentleman back there. I had a question, I think. This is about your point about Ford and Nixon. Here's one other possible scenario. Let's assume Trump loses the 2020 election and he decides to resign. Pence would then become president, and Pence could issue him a pardon. And then he could get off scot-free and, I guess, set up his alternative television network or be on Fox News or whatever. But that would be one potential scenario here. And lest we think this is really outlandish and unreal, heck, I mean, nothing would surprise me anymore. It's been so weird. Okay, the gentleman way back there, and then we'll get to you next, because you're on the right side.
I'm Blaine. Thank you. I was wondering about what somebody said about the New York district attorneys going after him. Like, we've talked about everything that could happen through Congress, but isn't this like kind of a runaround from that? Where are we at with his tax returns and the other crimes against the Trump organization? And how far can those indictments go?
Did you have a point related to that?
I was just going to amplify something that Pat said, so it's kind of off topic.
Well, let me get back to that in a minute. He does have to hold turn over his taxes. that is the law in the United States. And Mnuchin is violating that. We're stonewalling on it. But we do need to see his taxes, and that would reveal, I think, a lot of business irregularities. That old adage, which really was never said in the Watergate scandal, the Woodward and Bernstein, but applies, follow the money. That's what we need to do. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize something that Pat, yes, my name is Sean. Something to amplify what Pat was saying earlier. I am reminded of a statement that Elizabeth Warren recently made, having to do with unity in the party, to overcome Russian influence, which is going on right now, and we certainly know that. The words I think she said was that we need to win with an uncontestable margin. Those were the exact words, I think, regardless of who our nominee is. And that echoes what Auntie Maxine Waters has always said, which is any Democrat better than any Republican.
Is that a hidden plug for Joe Biden?
No. Oh, no, I'm not endorsing anybody. Way too early.
As I said, they're all strong candidates, and anyone would be better than the person we have now. Yeah, you've had your hand up for a while. Why don't you go first, because you haven't had a chance.
Janet, I just don't get why every single thing from every single committee in Congress that they ask for, they just say no. I mean, nothing, people don't show up, documents don't appear, and I know that they say they're taking the next steps, the various congressional committee chairs, but nothing is happening. Every day you wake up and there's nothing is moving, is how it feels.
Well, that was Trump's MO when he was a real estate developer. He was among the most litigious, if not the most litigious businessman in New York. And he's stalling. And so far he's having a fair amount of success in it. But, you know, we've had some victories. We'll see.
Being viewed a lot younger, you should be alarmed, because I am alarmed. And it bothers me that a lot of young people don't know the history of what happened to Germany and how Hitler came to power. He was elected. And what terrifies me more than anything, and if you haven't seen the Michael Moore movie, Fahrenheit 11/9, watch it. And that's the Fahrenheit 11/9, why are we echoing? Is because that was the day he was elected, or declared the winner. But I am terrified that we're going to have some kind of a terrorist attack or something close to the election, and they will just not do it. So I think we need to all be united, I agree, but it terrifies me if we wait until we get too close to the election.
Good sound effect.
Yeah, that is a consideration. We are bumping against time limits. Impeachment, one advantage of impeachment would be that we could get those subpoenas processed, we could get the documents. I mean, that's one thing that's my view in favor of it. Dottie, you haven't had a chance to talk yet, or am I getting your name wrong as usual? It's Dottie. Oh, it's okay.
Hello, my name is Dottie. I just want to say, as I sit and read and watch what's happening in our country today, I really feel like we're hostages. And the ransom we're paying is letting Trump get away with everything that he's getting away with. So we do have to stand together, I think, as a people, as a country, who believe that there is something to being fair, there is something about justice, and we have not seen it in this president. And when we talk about what can happen, I agree with you so much. We may be losing already and don't know it. And we may be doomed. And I have read once that America has fallen and we don't know it. And just like some of the other major countries, England and used to be, all of these countries, we will still exist, but we will not have the power. And Trump is doing everything that he can in his power so that he will have power. And we the people are allowing it. So I'm just so disillusioned, and I'm trying to figure out what do we do? What do we tell our young people? And you, when you talk about the progressive, just how progressive are you if you don't know your history? And if we don't know our history, we are doomed to fall. And just saying I'm this and I'm that will not get us anywhere. Trump is still in the White House. So we the people, we do have to do something. And I think he should be impeached. And whether he likes the I word or not, I said call him on it.
Yeah, I thank all three of you for your comments, and I just want to follow up. Yeah, I'm read some history about Germany, and I've read The Handmaid's Tale. And yeah, I want to come back to, I keep hearing, well, they have to do this and they can't do that, but all those statements are premised on the health of our democratic institutions and our system of checks and balances being intact. And I'm seeing more and more evidence that those institutions and systems are no longer intact. We've mentioned that people are being subpoenaed, documents are being subpoenaed, and they're just saying no. I mean, they're not providing any rational legal basis, they're just refusing to comply. And I haven't seen any accountability. And so my question is, what can we as average citizens do? Because I think that a lot of us are scared, a lot of us are angry, and a lot of us are frustrated. And I want to know what we as voters, as citizens, how can we respond to this in a constructive way that protects our democracy?
So I'm hearing a lot of people mention unity, and I feel like that's part of why we need to use whatever tools we have at our disposal. And right now for the Democrats, that is impeachment. And you know, that I hear this idea that Trump wants to be impeached or that impeachment will only make him stronger. Well, I remember being told not to go to the protest against the travel ban the first week of Trump's presidency because, oh, it's just gonna make him stronger. Oh, you can't complain about every little thing. Well, that wasn't a little thing, and most of what he does that is called little things aren't little things. They all add up. And it didn't make him stronger. It was a huge failure very early on in his presidency. He's a very unpopular president. And, you know, I know Clinton won after being unsuccessfully impeached, but his favorability ratings were far higher. And, right. And so I just don't think that that's a convincing argument for why not to impeach him. I think what makes him stronger is the division and the dithering and waiting around and not using the power that we have and letting him continue to get away with things that no other politician would have ever gotten away with.
How about getting some signs out? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take some signs.
Yeah, one thing to bear in mind about the Clinton example, his popularity actually dropped a little bit, and while Democrats picked up seats in the House, we lost the election in 2000, and Clinton could not go on the campaign trail and really stump for Al Gore, and that I think hurt Gore's election chances. One other point I want to make is a bit of historical correction. The Nazis never won a majority of the German vote. It was about 44%, in a very election where there was a lot of intimidation of the opposition parties in 1933. And it's disturbing the United States. The Trump phenomenon is occurring while we had a booming economy, the nation was at peace. German people embraced Hitler in the wake of a disastrous war, a horrible depression. Where are we going as a country? I mean, it just is disturbing to me. And if there is a war in Iran and a terrorist attack, God knows what Trump's going to do to Muslims. Yeah, so food for thought.
the next person.
Dr. Dan, I wanted to respond to some of the comments.
Oh, sure.
Okay, especially in the back about the New York jurisdiction. So we have a new African-American Attorney General in New York, and she has taken the lead. If you read the New York Times expose on Trump and how what a cheater he and his dad were for years and years and years, and their tenants and their scams, and you know, this idea that he somehow was a poor boy who, you know, pulled himself up by his bootstraps when actually he had $8 million in the bank when he was 8 years old, from his dad. And so the New York AG, I hope, has some, and those things that Mueller passed off to the Southern District of New York, like, as Dr. Dan mentioned, the tax returns and things like that, and the payment to Stormy Daniels. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully something will come out about that, and hopefully, as they said, that can restore some faith. But it is bad news because Trump has packed the courts. I was clerk to a federal judge here in Fresno for 2 years, and he's already put through, with McConnell's help, 100 federal judges on the bench with the craziest ideas about what the law is. They're completely incompetent, including one judge on the Ninth Circuit, which is the circuit that upheld the LGBTQ marriages and things like that. So we have to hold our breath there. So what can we do? We can, well, Trish says make signs. There is move on, impeach Trump across the country this Saturday on June 15th, 2019, so we can take to the streets again. I got tickets to the Trump inauguration through Jim Costa in 2017 because I thought Hillary was going to be inaugurated that day. So I boycotted the inauguration and then sent my 20-year-old daughter to the Women's March with 1 million people the next day on the DC, and that was worldwide, a most incredible protest. So believe it or not, some people, some friends of mine don't think that protests do anything, but I'm not of that, you know. The Women's March, I was a speaker and an organizer in 2018, and I was the only one who spoke out about sensible gun control here in Fresno, and that was across the board too. So I am a believer in people taking to the streets, and the other big thing, I mean, is that where are the Republicans, okay? We've only had 2 people speak out after Trump made his asinine comment yesterday, and that was Romney and that was Lindsey Graham. If you watch the TV show like I have, The Circus on Showtime, Graham has really flipped his lid because when he was running against Trump, he called him a moron and an idiot and all this kind of stuff, and now he's drunk the Kool-Aid. So we have to really, put pressure on the Republicans, and we have to take back the Senate. There are 4, possible 6 in the Senate that we could really influence by letter writing, calling, getting our friends in those states to really put pressure and make sure the Democrats get those at least 4, possibly 6 states in the Senate to take back and really push. There is a dump McConnell, dump Mitch, a ditch Mitch a campaign going on nationwide, and so we can hopefully take that. And finally, we just need to register more voters. That is the bottom line. The Central Committee here goes to the naturalization downtown ceremony. There's 600 to 900 once a month potential voters there. And so if you can volunteer on once a month, Tuesday, we do have sign-ups in the back for that.
Yeah, my name's Melinda, and thanks Pat and Dr. Dan. Is this on?
You're good.
I appreciate all of these things that we need to do, and I agree with them. And I'm thinking, I don't know if any of you have been carrying on conversations with people who still are, are Trump supporters, which is interesting. But it seems our task is to really make distinctions. It seems the number one propaganda tool of both first Putin and now Trump is false equivalencies. And now I just listened to Kevin McCarthy earlier today, and he was making false equivalency between the Steele dossier and saying, well, Democrats are hypocrites because they were off getting, information on Hillary, and so, whatever Trump has done is just as bad. So it just requires so much of us to make these distinctions, and when we're having these conversations. And again, back to the fourth estate, which is, we need the separation of powers, et cetera, and because of the day of social media, we're just, again, Trump is turning it and turning it and turning it again, setting up, he made that horrible comment inviting foreign powers in, and now they've got that all equivocated again. So anyway, just, it requires a lot of us, and I haven't given up on some of my Republican Trump supporters who are lifetime friends, so anyway.
You're right, it's a hard slog. Who has another comment? Okay, is he again? Yeah, we need to get the right side here.
Let's see, what was this one? I know what we can do, because we can urge Jim Costa to support impeachment, because right now he's not on the 60 list that's supporting impeachment. And I've already sent contacted him to urge him to support it, but he's not listening to me, so maybe there's more of us calling him anyway. And then also, I don't think that the Democrats that Trump can be beaten without passing articles of impeachment in the House. And so and I also think that Pelosi's delay strategy is weak. It's making the Democrats look weak, and so that's all.
Michael back here had a comment or wanted to say something?
So I appreciate the comment from the two gentlemen that were talking about trust. If you look at the history of our democracy, it's based on the trust we've had in our institutions. And as much as I detested Richard Nixon, if he had been sentenced to jail, he would have gone to jail. And but right now, we have a political party that has said it will ignore or abuse the trust that we have in all of these institutions. They want absolute power, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. So it's incumbent on us to stop this aberrant behavior. And impeachment, not only of Trump, but whoever else we can impeach, we should be going after that and doing it immediately. The happiest person in America right now is Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz is planning his coup. He's planning what he's going to do when he takes over the country, and he's looking at what's happening right now, and he's saying, nobody's going to stop me.
Wow, thank you. Let's see. Well, ladies first, or?
Pat was announcing, to get out and protest. For those of you that don't know, the event that we have here for impeaching is at the corner of Blackstone and Nees at 1 o'clock on this coming Saturday.
Oh, that's hot. It won't be that bad.
Bring it. I don't know. I'm Paul. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I see Elizabeth Warren talk, I just get so excited for Elizabeth Warren, and then I see Mayor Pete talk, and I get all excited. I'm all for Mayor Pete, and then even old Biden, man, I like Biden, you know. And I think one of the things, you know, we're asking what we can do. I think one of the things that was really important for us to do is to be nice to each other. You know, and I know Twitter isn't life, thank God, but honestly, some of the most vicious commenters or posters that I've seen, you know, if I'm advocating for a particular person, is my fellow lefties, you know, my fellow Democrats, and yeah, and that's true. And sometimes you know, well, he said some of them might be Russian bots, and sometimes I have responded to them like, prove to me you're not a bot, and we'll talk. But you know, I was trying to explain to one of my kids a couple years ago that, you know, I've been voting for president since I think Jimmy Carter was the first person I voted for, and you know, the candidate that I endorse in the primaries is almost never the one who wins, right? And so we have to kind of get used to that, and to know that, okay, Elizabeth Warren isn't perfect. You know, she has made mistakes in the past. She's offended people and so on, and maybe she hasn't adequately apologized, or maybe she has. I don't know. Biden has certainly made his set of mistakes. I'm sure if you dig into any of these people, none of them walk on water. They've all said or done things that are going to offend or whatever. We all have. All of us have. So we need to have some tolerance for these candidates, and we need to advocate for the people we like. But the person you like is probably not going to win the nomination. So we need to have this attitude. We're going to get behind whoever wins, because if not, we're going to lose. And if we lose this time, we're going to lose everything. So
the Republicans do that. They all get behind.
Yeah, they all do.
Yeah, they're good at it. No matter who it is, even Trump.
Well, I'm Myra, and just following up to what Paul said, I'm sitting here, my biggest concern is 2020. And I am really concerned about our party and our Congress spending a lot of time and energy and resources on an impeachment that is not going to remove Trump from office. And that is the goal, is to get Trump out of office.
Right.
So I feel like, you know, I'm not sure about whether we should impeach him or not, but my fear is that if that becomes the focus for the next year and a half, we're going to lose this election. He's not going to be removed from office. He is going to run, and there's a very good chance he's going to win again. And I just think we need to put all of our resources into coming together on one Democratic candidate. I don't care who it is, as long as it's not Donald Trump. I just want a Democrat, and we need to stop shooting each other in this circular firing squad that's going to go on in the primary between the Democratic candidates, and we just need to figure out which one has the best chance of beating Trump, and we all need to get behind that candidate, period.
Well, apparently half a dozen of them, according to a recent poll, but we can't read too much into that right now. Let's see. Well, Dottie, you mentioned that first.
I just want to say, Pat, you mentioned we need to register people to vote. I think we have quite a few people who are registered that don't vote. So that should be our cry, get out to vote. We were registering people at the fair in October. A young man came by and I wanted to register him to vote. And he said, no, I hate Trump and I'm not voting. And I said, well, I'm not going to argue with you. But my point is, we need to get people to vote. It's not so much about registering, get them out to vote. That's what we have to do.
Not just here in California. I mean, whoever the Democrats run is going to win California by a supermajority. We need to try and focus on trans-state activity, to do what we can to mobilize and register voters in those swing states. I wish we didn't have the Electoral College, but we're stuck with it for the 2020 election. So we need to do our damnedest in places like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, above all Florida, and keep our fingers crossed about Broward County.
I wanted to say one thing too. We haven't talked about money in the election to run for president. Just in California alone is 67 million. Trump already has 100 million in his war chest. So as it gets closer and as you're looking to your candidate that you want to have win, it is about donating money to them too, so they can run. We have 4 or 5 states are running, and then the following Tuesday, March 3rd, here in California and Texas, and the big Super Tuesday. So it puts a lot of pressure on these candidates to go across country, to reach out to all kinds of voters. And if you haven't ever heard, these caucuses are weird kind of things in Iowa and Nevada. You just have to go up to like a school or somebody's house, between noon and 3 o'clock, and you stand on the side in the room of the person you want to vote for president during the caucus. And then if they lose there, then you get a second chance to go and move to the other side of the room to people, for a person that you might like. And so caucuses are weird kind of things, and in California we don't really understand them because we have this primary thing. But also, if you don't know, California has now changed its election procedures, and maybe somebody else who's heard Randy Orth locally can explain what those are. So it's going to try, at least in California, to make it easier for voters to vote.
I'm wondering if anyone wants to follow up on Myra's comment. Are there other people who feel the same way with respect to impeachment? Yeah.
I'm concerned that Democrats are looking weak. And I think if we look weak, that we're going to be no more attractive than the Trump administration when the election comes. If we look weak, and the impeachment thing would help us get some strength and get some of these subpoenas to work, and demonstrations. It's better than just feeling like we're doing nothing and swallowing this nonsense, this really obstructive nonsense. Oh, I'm not going to go to the one this weekend because I got to go to my son's graduation. But I want to see a lot more of it, and I've gone to many demonstrations here, and we could have a lot more of this. And when I said the Women's March, I mean the Women's March after Trump got elected. The hordes of people in the streets. Oh, yeah. That, there was a guy on MSNBC. He's a former FBI director. It's Neil Cattell, for those of you.
Yeah, Cattell.
Okay. He said if they were talking about dumping Rosenstein, and this was back some months, and he said he after he got done with his spiel, he put out, he said, people have got to really demonstrate, get out and demonstrate. This is Neil Cattell that said that. And that's what it's gonna take, I think, I really do.
I can recommend a speech that's on, you can get on the internet. Rick Wilson, former Republican Party strategist, never Trumper, gave a really great address before the Commonwealth Club of California. And as he said at one point in that address, we need someone who can, quote unquote, kick his ass up and down the street every day.
Yeah.
And that's what it's going to take.
Flints, signs.
Yeah. Okay.
I have really mixed feelings about the impeachment. You've got the one side saying we'll look weak, and I think it is their constitutional responsibility to do it. That's what they're charged with. I work at the Fresno Police Department, so I am around a lot of Trumpers. And so I see a lot of the stuff on Facebook. And the other thing I'm afraid of is, okay, yeah, we may appear weak, but we are being painted as sore losers, you know, the not my president. And I see comments constantly about, you know, suck it up, snowflakes. He's going to be in there for 5 more years. So, you know, maybe just getting his ass thrown out after the election is actually better. I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I think it is their responsibility to do what they're charged with, but especially if we lose, they're going to really, his supporters, have you ever watched one of his rallies from start to end?
Someone else?
Daniel, we have a comment from somebody online.
Oh,
I
great.
could read it actually.
Okay. Wow.
From Facebook, somebody asked or comments that as far as to impeach or not, ask yourself, what would the Republicans do? That's Anna Ray.
That's a good point.
I understand your comment, Margaret. My feeling is that Congress does a lot of things at the same time. And yes, once the move to impeachment starts, a lot of what we will be hearing in the news is going to be about that. So it's going to be important that we do everything we can to make sure that other issues are in the news as well.
Someone else want to follow up on that?
How about in the VIP section?
Over here.
No, that's all right. Keep the microphone. I can deal with that. Okay. I just, to Tucker's point, I don't think that Trump will leave. I think that the Secret Service and some kind of leadership would have to come and physically take him out, his son's out, his daughter. I really do. I swear to God. I don't just see him if he loses or if he gets impeached. He ain't going to leave willingly. But the other thing I want to know about that nobody's mentioned is all these kids that are in concentration camps, that are being molested, that are sick, that are dying, separated from their parents. Will Trump and Stephen Miller ever be brought up on crimes against humanity after we somehow drag him out?
Hopefully by The Hague.
Yeah.
It might have to be outside the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because if a Democrat gets elected and tries to prosecute those people, they'll be charged, or they'll be accused of using their powers unjustifiably, or going after political opponents. Never mind that Trump talked about locking Hillary up,
Or concentration camps.
Yeah.
Okay, someone else.
I have to think my friend.
Let's see. Okay. Well, I think you had your hand up first, right? Yeah, we'll go with you and then we'll go.
Yeah. Name's John. Again, I'll echo some of the key things said here, which is just plain the old thing that Democrats have been famous for: grassroots, register people to vote, get them out to vote. We were always the best at that, always, and we still are. So it may be a numbers game. I don't think it will be, but we've got a lot of people we can register and we can get to vote. So I think that's probably strategy number one. I don't think, and I'm the older Democrat, back with McGovern and so forth, and I have sons and daughters, and I tell them, we're Democrats. Grandparents, everybody Democrats. We're the party of Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, all of it. I said, what are we afraid of? I mean, let's look over the Republicans and you name us your top people. They don't compare. And you look at all the things that us baby boomers are relying on, others, the Medicares, and we know what the Social Securities and all those other socialistic programs, right? That everybody loves, including the Republicans. And I think, what are we afraid of? This bone-spored idiot who, is a thief, is all the bad things we can think of, and we're not lying when we say that. And I said, what are we, the Roosevelt what's Kennedy, all these parties afraid of this character and his deplorables? And I just amazes me. I said, why is he making us so damn afraid? What has he got going for him that we're afraid of him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So to me, it's just, this character will be history soon. And you all know that 23 people or so running, every one of them better than he was. We all know that. And we all know that sitting here in this room, and the folks that are here, and the folks that, I'm from San Diego, and the folks that sit over in San Diego, and the folks that sit in LA and everything, all of us Democrats, we all are pretty solid, think the same way, and we all have a good history. So I'm like, this character got through because 3 states screwed up that shouldn't have. That's how he got through. She got 3 million more votes, not him. And so I'm not worried about him saying, I'm not leaving the presidency. He's going to go out dragged out. He's not, if he loses, he's not leaving. It's not to me even a nil. We got some good candidates, and I don't really care, like someone said here, who he or she is. And I was so on Biden, but if he can win, and I like Harris, if she could be a VP, or whoever it is, or she could be, or any of them, they'll beat them. We're there behind them, and we just got to register every single potential Democratic vote and make sure everyone's there, and they're toast. That little group of deplorables are just not gonna do it. And those rallies we see, and I watch and all of them, I keep saying, keep getting crazier, folks. Trump keep this impeachment stuff, and I kind of hope she drags it on and doesn't get the impeachment and just keep bringing the stuff and keeping him crazy. And those deplorables getting crazy because we already see him and go like, holy moly, who the? And I love to start arguing with them. Before now I'm starting like, okay, let's have a good argument about it.
Well, John, I have a confession to make, okay? I volunteered and worked on the Hillary campaign for 3 years, and my white middle-class husband claimed he voted for Hillary, but he is now a Trumper, and they are among us, okay? And it is insanity for me. It is absolutely insanity. But I understand what Dee's talking about, because my husband is a former county public works employee, and he's retired, and he has nothing better to listen to the hateful radio shows. It's the radio shows. And when I told him that I was doing this tonight, he gave me one of those looks, So I am in the trenches, okay? And I understand what it is about and how difficult it is to convince our loved ones once they've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I think let's, I want to bring in one thing that is kind of an optimistic note. Time is on our side, as is demography. And Republicans can try, and they will work really hard to suppress the vote, to make it more difficult for people of color to register. But eventually that dam's going to break. And when that happens, the party's really going to be swept away. And I just cannot for the life of me understand the long-term strategy of the GOP. It's kind of like the lemming party, because they're risking nationally branding themselves like the Republicans did in California with the 187 proposition.
I think they've decided that. I think that Republicans, this is what scares me the most, but this whole thing, I think the Republicans have made the decision that, okay, we can either have the policies we want or we can have democracy, but we can't have both.
Yeah, no,
and we're heading towards minority rule. And I mean, we're kind of there, but it can get vicious. It can happen here.
Yeah, well, when Trump was talking in the White House with the leader of Poland, which is an illiberal democracy where they're trying to control everything, and he was asked about democracy, what did he say? Oh, it's no problem. So yeah, I think our institutions are a little more robust than they are in Poland, but you're right. This is an inflection point in 2020. And we need to get him out. We need to control the Senate so we can appoint judges, because if there's a Republican majority in the Senate, you can be damn sure that Mitch McConnell will stare whoever is the Democrat in the White House, stare him in the eyes and say, you're not getting any judges. You're not going to get a Supreme Court justice. So we've got to flip those key states, Maine, Colorado, possibly Texas,
South Carolina.
and North Carolina. So anyway, some more comments?
Right here.
Okay.
I won't need that, I speak loud enough. Anyway, on signs, you gotta have the American flag, signs like this. Right? And we gotta have other sayings, but everything's gotta be in unison. Vote blue. Register blue.
Yeah.
All these ideas with the flag. That's the only way it's gonna work. Without the flag, it's not gonna work. On both sides. Whatever your thing is, blue. Because the young people, they're captured by color.
So, I'm of the opinion that politics should not be a consideration in the impeachment discussion. If we do not move forward with impeachment, we are validating Donald Trump's behavior. Look at Ronald Reagan. He didn't pay any price for Iran-Contra. And George W. Bush and Dick Cheney sent us to a war on evidence they made up. They sent Americans to die on BS. And now, even Democrats are saying, oh, George W. Bush wasn't so bad. And this is a warped society. But if we don't move forward with impeachment, the next Republican is going to take this even further.
Yeah.
And so we've got to nip it in the bud, and we've got to do it now.
Sounds good.
Go ahead, Pat.
This works.
So it's about time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things that announcements I want to make. First of all, there are flyers and tickets for the Clovis Democratic Club's annual patriotic picnic. It's Friday, June 21st at the Clovis Veterans Memorial District. It's inside because I go every year, and about 4 years ago I almost passed out when it was 110 and Dottie had to pour water over my head. It's a wonderful, wonderful event, and this year the guest speaker is going to be Rusty Hicks. He was newly elected the chair of the California Democratic Party. So he's been in the Valley, but if you haven't heard him speak, it's a complete tri-tip dinner, a fundraiser. It's $40 per person if you get your ticket tonight or pay by June 15th, and $50 after that or at the door. And so I have a flyer here. And Jeff, raise your hand. There's Jeff over there. He has tickets tonight. It's really terrific. And I also wanted to let you know that I recommend, if you want to buy the Mueller report, there are two versions. One is the thin Department of Justice Mueller report that isn't as good as this one by the Washington Post. This one that I've read twice or listened to twice is my favorite because it's got a list of cast of characters. It's got a timeline. It's got Mueller's executive summaries in it. It's got a glossary of legal terms. It's got the most important indictments in the back. And it actually has the same pages numbers as the Department of Justice one, and the same redactions that we currently have. I got my discount at Barnes & Noble's hard copy was $13.50, but I understand you can get it on Amazon Prime if you want for as low as $9. There's also other thing that I joined. How did I hear Chairman Nadler speak 2 weeks ago? Because there's something called the Mueller Book Club. And you all can go online and Google it and sign up for free. And so every week they have somebody, a guest speaker, and when I was on the call 2 weeks ago, it was about 1,000 people, 90% of which were attorneys, but you don't have to be an attorney, and it's free. And that's when Nadler came on for a good half hour, and that's where I got the inside skinny. Last week or this week, it was supposed to be Gloria Steinem as the guest, and I unfortunately missed that. But anyway, that's another way to read out more about the Mueller report without actually reading it. You can, and they hit the highlights too. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming. You know, this is really our democracy in action. This is a constitutional crisis already, as we all understand. The people that showed up tonight understand what is at stake. And I want to thank the Democratic Central Committee and people who helped put this on. Michael Evans, our chair back there. Let's give him a hand. We want to thank Jeff Rosendale, who has actually taped this for YouTube, and we will be posting it on a YouTube channel afterwards. I didn't know this, but the Central Committee has its own YouTube channel, so if you have friends who couldn't make it tonight or really want to see it, or if you want to re-see it, again, it'll be on the Central Committee's YouTube channel. I want to thank, of course, the 4 Central Committee interns that helped set up, and Moises Hernandez, the staffer who isn't here tonight. He's in Bakersfield, but he helped us with the tech stuff. And finally, I want to thank Janet Miller, who also helped with the mics, who had to leave early. So let's give everybody a hand. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Garst. It was really fun with you. And now, because we are depressed if we don't laugh, he has found and is going to play a Trumpster song from Germany.
It's only 1 minute. It has subtitles, I think.
In the history of the United States, me, Donald John Trump. There's this. Hello.
Oh, it doesn't have subtitles.
Sorry, I'll make sure.
Do you want to,
Even without the subtitles, it looks like it's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's like an option.
well, we can just go ahead and play it.
Okay.
Some songs over there. No, that's not it. He makes the border thick roadie, Mexican and Muslim. How should they all be thrown out? They love me for that. The dirt thrower Trump.
Can I get a hallelujah?
Who is that? He has his crazy fans. He's making racism acceptable, laughing about handicapped people. America good night.
Ay, ay, ay.
The weirdy bird Trump. You can Google that. There is a English, there's a version of English subtitles. Some of the very best satire on about Trump has been on German television. They had an advertisement for the Trump Force One, an airplane with a special waterboarding room for terrorists. You can issue the nuclear codes in a hot tub with hot women, and you can strike Mexico and Syria on the way to Moscow. It doesn't matter. And as the advertisement ended, the plane for Kleiner, for Rosa Arschlocken mit Kleiner Plane. big assholes with small plans.
Thank you again, and if you'd like to volunteer here at the headquarters or volunteer for registration, Michael back there has a sign-up sheet, so please do that on your way out. And thank you so much for coming and for all your comments.
Yeah.